Okay. Good evening, everyone. We're going to call tonight's meeting, the WPCA meeting of July 23rd, 2018, to order. Being that we're still waiting on a council or two, which I do know are on their way, we're going to dispense with item number 2 of approval of the minutes, as we need 6 for quorum. And I would like to move on to item number 3, report by Mr. John Casey, the town engineer.
I had sent out a memo for my report. Item number 1 was the I&I capacity study. Ty and Bond is a consultant working on that. They've completed their flow isolation work, and they are now moving on to the next 2 phases of the work, which is going to be televising the sewers with a closed circuit camera, and that work should be starting shortly. And then at the same time, or overlapping that, we'll be working on smoke testing. And the smoke testing of the sewer is where we blow smoke into the sewer system, and then the smoke finds its way out to wherever it might go. And if it comes out, we should see it coming out of sewer connections that have a trap. It wouldn't go into something like your toilet or your sink that has a trap, but it'll go out your vent of your roof where sewer gases normally would vent. So that would be a normal situation. But if we start to see it coming out of a catch basin, or coming out of a yard drain, or coming out of your gutter or something like that, then we would know that that's a source of where clean water is coming into the system. So that's the purpose of the smoke test, to see if we can visually see evidence of clean water coming in, and then when we see it, we'll make a note of it, and then we'll be able to follow up and try to correct that situation, keep the clean water out of the system. So that work, I just want to make a point of that to let you know that we'll be sending out notices next week to let the public know that we're going to be doing it. So if they see smoke coming out of their sewer vent and their roof, they won't be too shocked about it, and they'll see us around town, where in the areas of town that were indicated in our study that we should be focusing on.
Are those from a letting the public know? I'm assuming all the newspapers or certain sections of town getting an actual mailer to their homes.
We're gonna get a press release to the newspaper, and then each house on the street that we're working will have in advance a flyer left at their door.
Okay.
And then I'm going to talk to the mayor's office about, if there's other, they'll put it on their Facebook page and their other media course outlets.
Okay.
So that's where we are on that project, and obviously at this point we're still gathering data, and we'll be reaching conclusions in the future.
John, one other question. How often do we do that in the smoke testing?
It's about a 6-week process, I think.
How often? Is it yearly, annual?
Oh, no, we haven't done it in 25 years.
Okay.
So hopefully, every 25 years we'll find something good.
Thank you.
The pump station project, I'll just skip for a second. The sewer lining project, we've started that. It's going along fine so far, and they should be done in a couple weeks. And then I'll let you know if we had any problems there, but I think so far so good. And then item 3 was connect to the public sewer from the Shelton development. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, we'll take an update. The commission will take an update if you'd like to give it, or if Attorney Marino would like to give an update as to where we stand with that.
We're still in process. We're still, we've gotten the figures that we were needed for purposes of the added expense for the pump. And now I'm actually, in an effort to save expense, I am working off of trying to get my hands on another agreement that was entered into, so I'm not reinventing the wheel. Attorney Kelly was away last week, but he was back today, so I wanted to give him a day to get back into his office before I jumped him. So I'm planning on jumping on him tomorrow. And then once I have that, it should be a very straightforward process. So my expectation is by your next meeting, we'll have something to present. But it's my understanding that from the developer's standpoint, that time is not of the essence, so they're not in a rush. But that's where it stands at the moment.
Thank you, Mr. Marino. Any questions for Vin? No, thank you, sir.
The result of the presentation that we gave a couple months ago. I hope everyone had a chance to look at the link we sent out so you could refresh your memory on the issues. But we are focusing on one of the options to continue with the design phase. And we have submitted the proposed fee to DEP for their review and comment, and they've approved the fee, the scope of the work, and the design fee, and they're still reviewing the permit part of that fee, but we're almost 100% complete on approval of the fee from DEP. And so I'll have Amy come up to talk about where we're at with the option evaluation.
So if you remember can you guys hear me? If you remember the last time that we were here, we gave two options. The first option was doing excavating, sheeting down to the base mat foundation of your 6 pump stations, and then reinforcing those walls, bringing it up to the roof line, replacing the above ground walls, and then putting back the roofs and all the equipment so that your stations will be 100% protected from 100 plus 3 foot flood item. The second option was a partial reinforcement of the underground walls and employing some staff operations to come out to the site and flood those structures so then you could weigh down those stations and you wouldn't have to put the additional concrete in. Because we don't know what type of storm would be happening and if access would be available to those stations across the town, we're narrowing in on option number 1. So we've presented our design fee of $496,000 to do these 6 stations structural improvements. As John stated, DEEP has weighed in on our scope of work, and we're hoping that we can answer any questions that you have so that once we get that full approval from DEEP, we can move forward with the design. So I'll take your questions.
Katie, just a question for you. I remember when we had spoken, so option 2, which is what we were initially leaning towards doing, essentially, if I'm hearing you correctly, in the event of a 100-year storm, we would essentially have to, personnel would have to flood the pump stations manually. Is that correct?
So what we would do in option number 2 is put in some equipment so that there'd be piezometers and a means to flood the system. So this would either be done by operations staff or it would likely be done by operations staff. So, and if the station's flooded, there would be minor equipment that would be lost, like an HVAC unit. There would be minor costs. However, you wouldn't be able to bounce back into full operation until the storm was over and you were able to get those materials. Your electric equipment, your dry pit submersible pumps, those would all be able to bounce back, but some of those minor items like a receptacle, minor items like that, you might have to replace. So the less risky situation is to go with option number 1, which is what us and the town staff have narrowed in on as the recommended option.
Thank you, Katie. And Mr. Casey, quick question regarding DEEP and their weigh-in on this. Is this their bottom line standard now, or did they give us any flexibility?
They don't give a mandate on how to comply with the regulations, but they do have a policy that we had just gotten a copy of. I'm just going to give you the date just so you know. November 14th, 2017 was when they issued their policy on this storm resiliency for municipal wastewater infrastructure. And in this policy, they've set requirements for protecting the infrastructure. In this case, it would be the 100-year flood elevation calculated from FEMA, plus 3 additional feet in addition to that.
Okay.
And so that is our goal, and we presented the 2 options to DEP for that we looked at, and they said either one of those options would fulfill the requirement to meet the standard. But then in reviewing further the options, we felt that the less risky option for the town in the future to actually protect the station would be to go with option 1.
Option 1. Okay. Thank you. Any questions for, yes, Ms. Dancho?
I just have a couple of questions. So you're saying that option 2 would need to be flooded if this storm was occurring. So what would be the indication that now is the time to start filling these stations with water as opposed to maybe the meteorologist being wrong? I don't know.
Yeah, so that is a risk that exists because the plant staff would have to utilize the meteorological reports,
Right.
and if they saw stuff coming in and they were confident, they would have to go around to the 6 stations and employ
So like you
flooding.
would do that, like what, the day before or during the storm or?
So depending on what size line we have coming into the station, it might change station by station. But yes, it would be hours to a day ahead of time.
So if these stations, all of them, not just these 6, or just these 6, you're saying, if we decided, okay, they have to be filled up with water, and it wasn't a catastrophic flood, then we've got the damage with no real reason for having the damage done.
Correct. And what a risk is of this method is the town staff might not be able to get around town depending on how quickly that storm is coming in. And, there's 10 stations and a plant, so they're going to be busy at that time.
So this is just guesswork, really, like.
It's an educated guess.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions? Mr. O'Brien?
Now, these costs that you show here are just estimated costs? Because this has to go out to bid, right?
I'm not quite sure what you're looking at.
Oh, the option 1 where it shows the different costs for each.
Okay. So those are construction capital probable costs of construction. So right now, at the point of design where we are, which is as far as the equipment rehab, we're 75%, but this new issue, we're about 10% complete. We've kind of flushed through a couple of options. So that has a contingency on it so that unforeseen things that come up during a design we can account for. And then it's construction costs. That was a long way of getting to construction costs.
And then, Chris, I think did you mention possible low-interest loans may be available?
Well, Mr. Casey, you want to comment?
Well, so our project is funded by, or will be funded by the Clean Water Fund from the state of Connecticut, which is a 2% loan for the construction, or for the design and the construction. We would apply, for this as well under that program. So when we construct each station, these improvements will be part of that station, and that station will be funded by the Clean Water Fund through the state DEP. The question that we will talk about in the near future is how we should phase our projects to, be able to afford all this over a period of time. So we'll bring the options, I think, back to you with maybe some funding options, because we did talk briefly to the finance director about the possibility, well, maybe not everything has to be Clean Water Fund funded. So maybe the town could share some of the costs, and we can get a different schedule that might be more efficient. So we haven't gotten through all that thinking yet, so we'll bring that to you when we do.
So, John, so for the purposes of this evening, it's the permission to move forward with the $496,000 for design phase, of which I believe I heard you say we are going to take through the Clean Water Fund at 2%.
Yes, we haven't applied for the Clean Water Fund yet, but in doing the procedures we're doing, like getting the DEP to review and approve the scope and fee ahead of time, it will be eligible when we get to the construction phase. We'll add the design costs in, and that's the way DEP prefers that we do it.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Harden?
Good evening. How long will this process take if we decide to go with this new system? Because anything could happen during the time that the system is being put in place. Would we be pushed back to flood the 6 tanks out and deal with the mess then? Or will there be something put in place while this, it's being built or resurfaced?
So every schedule has a risk associated with it. What we're trying to do is prioritize how quickly we could get a project to bid and construction, along with the prioritization of the equipment that needs to be upgraded, which was the original point of this project, and then also be able to fit in the resiliency aspects for your most at-risk stations, because some of your stations are further away from a tidal wave or effects from Long Island Sound or the Housatonic River. So, as John said, if we have approval to move forward, what we'll end up doing is trying to prioritize how to schedule those now 6 projects against a time period. But generally, we would have one project designed and ready to go in front of DEEP for review within 16 weeks, another project following 12 weeks after that. Then it would go through a month or 2 or 3 of approval process by DEEP, and then it would go through a bidding phase, which is usually 6 weeks. From there, it would probably be, say, a 15-month construction period for each project, estimating. We haven't.
So do we have a risk of flooding the stations while this process is being done, or again, will something be put in place? Because obviously you can't do the work unless the bids are taken care of and the certificates are given by DEP to do the work.
Right. So while we're doing the design, what we can do is provide the highest risk for buoyancy, which is the reason why you would flood a station, because you want to weigh down the station so that the pipes don't break as water comes up from the bottom and floats it like a bathtub. So what we would do would be provide that information to the TUMS so that they can flood the station on a temporary basis.
So if they do that, then we still have to pay to have the HAV, VAC, or whatever you said. So it will be double cost factors.
Option
Let me just say that if we were to purposely flood a pump station between now and the time we actually build these stations, we're not really even set up to do that as far as having the piping and the systems available to provide the amount of water that we need to fill up a pump station. And
it would be a slow process.
yeah, so I mean, I wouldn't really think we would take that action. We have never done it. You know, when Hurricane Sandy came up, you were talking about what our decision time was. That would have been a time we would have been considering it. And had we done that to all of our pump stations, then, and it didn't have any effect, as it turns out, all of our pump stations would have been underwater. And the infrastructure in the pump station isn't set up to be flooded right now. So flooding the dry side of our pump stations now with our existing pumps would have more of an effect, I would think.
It's all a risk.
Yeah. So I think we're under risk now. If we had a hurricane, in 2 weeks, we would be at risk. We had a couple hurricanes in the last 10 years, and we were at risk, but we made out okay. So this is an extreme condition, but there's always a risk.
Any other questions? Nope. Okay. With that, I will entertain a motion to proceed with the approval of $496,000 of design taken in Mr. Casey, if we can, obviously put in the minutes that we'll apply through the Clean Water Fund for that as first preference.
Yeah, and that's to design option 2.
To design option 2. Excuse me, to design option 1. Option 1.
Going back and forth.
So I will entertain that motion. I have a motion by Ms. Dancho,
I'll make a motion to approve the amount of $496,000 for option 1 of the sewer project.
Okay, do I have a second? Second by Mr. O'Brien. Any discussion? No, hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously, 6-0. Thank you. I would like to go back in order of the agenda and go back to I'll take a motion to approve the minutes from minutes of regularly scheduled meetings from April 23rd and public hearing and special meeting on May 29th. Motion by Mr. Harden, second by Mr. Ticky. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passed unanimously. Moving down to item number 4 now, Mr. Hyde.
Our monthly operating report for June 2018. Flows are normal at this point. Average water temperature is 68.7. pH, which can be adjusted with soda ash, has become more of a substantial issue. Typically, after adjusting the pH with a dose of soda ash, nitrification picks up and you no longer need soda ash. Currently, discontinuation of soda ash quickly results in pH lowering denitrification loss. Therefore, no ammonia breakdown and high nitrogen release levels. However, nitrogen levels in our effluent met permit for the month of June. We are currently researching potential sources of these issues. Meeting the nitrogen levels for the 2018 permit is anticipated. What this is about is that we had a little trouble in 2017. Our plant started nitrifying and denitrifying about a month behind the regular schedule. Typically April, late March, early April, we start to nitrify. It took us into May last year. This year, we started to head in that direction back in March. We thought we were going to have a very strong year. Every time our plant started to perform, it would stall again. Sometimes we thought we smelt fuel coming through during some of our pump station cleanings. We saw some signs of oil coming through. And it turns out that as we approached, as we got into June, we were finding that we're having a lot of trouble with the pH. It started and it almost went in March. April was wet, almost went in May. We almost didn't make it in June. Something has been getting into our system and killing our biological action. We believe that may be, I'm getting a little bit off track here, but we believe that may be the result of the breweries or some other facilities that we have in the town here. One of which is up to capacity and looking for an expansion or working on an expansion at this time. And what we're seeing is that a pattern of as they got up to their capacities, what they're putting into our system is having more and more of an effect on our treatment of the product. At this point, we are running a soda ash continuously to keep the pH where it is, to keep the pH at a level high enough to keep the nitrification and denitrification process working, to limit our nitrogen release levels. As I said, at this point, we're hoping that we're going to meet the nitrogen levels for 2018, but on the other hand, we're having more problems than we've ever had before. If we perform for the rest of the year the way that we performed for the remainder of last year, we will just make the permit and not have any payout. We are a ways behind at this time, but we start every year a ways behind. This is going to require, I want to get back to this a little bit further into the report. I think this is another section on it. It gets into the new items. The final effluent pump The final effluent pump was installed as scheduled on February 26th. There was some faulty cooling water seal, which was been repaired by the vendors as of June 21st. And those pumps are now in good shape and running properly. That project is complete. UV disinfection system upgrade began on March 6th, 2018. Although the project has experienced several setbacks, the system is considerably improved at this point. The vendor continues to work towards resolving a couple of unforeseen issues. All payments are still being withheld until resolution, but they are, we've got one more meeting coming up in a week or so, probably a week and a half, and we should be able to resolve our issues by the next meeting. Plant and pump station maintenance. Gus Gomez is our new maintenance crew leader. Gus is doing an outstanding job. Although there are several repairs to be done, the maintenance personnel have transitioned to maintenance duties rather than all emergency repairs. At this point, we've got, with the lower flows, we've shut down one of the primary and one of the secondary tanks for cleaning and maintenance, which has not been a previous practice. While shutting them down, the maintenance and cleaning has not been the practice. We're also finding that through our efforts of going after the bar racks, the pump stations, and so forth, that as we shut these tanks down, there's considerably less debris in our systems inside. You know, I had mentioned in the past how the rags used to gather back together and make cords and break, we broke a 2 and 9/16 inch shaft in half with just the rags. We're seeing very few rags. We are seeing positive effects of our efforts. The biofilter failure. We had a complaint. The mayor received a letter from the Tide Harbor condominiums about odors coming out of our facility. They mentioned that they have complained of this in the past. Didn't believe they were receiving a good response to it. It turns out when I took over, I asked about the biofilter system, and I was informed that the only thing wrong with it was one switch to the backup fan for circulating. Upon further evaluation, I wish I had that other form with me. We found that there was considerably more wrong with it. The humidification tower's water feed system had frozen 1 year. Instead of repairing it, it had been shut down, was no longer operated. That the sprinkler system that keeps the chips moist to help with the to keep the operation working, parts had been cut out and removed from. We're working on repairing those issues at this point. It does include, we're going to need to replace 550 cubic yards of chips and compost, and we have a bid in right now that's in the line of $39,000. I believe that's the only bid we have, but I have to look into that a little bit further, just for the chip handling. Repairs to the plumbing and the pumps and the humidification tower are underway. The sprinkler system and air collection distribution systems are in process also. We added a couple of foggers for odor masking and have put them into use. We've instructed vendors to install the required vent lines on all sludge trailers. I guess some of our carriers bought new trailers, and for some reason they didn't put the vent lines to carry the odor from the front of the truck to the back of the truck so they could hook into our system. We should have caught that, but we have caught it now. And that was a very recent issue. We've closed all the doors to the odorous areas. We've done some rescheduling on our dumpster removals and so forth, so that anything that is odorous that's indoors is only outside for a few moments before it gets taken away in a truck. And we've washed down some of the prime areas, the degritter area and the headworks, where it's basically the most odorous operations in our facility. And we've been, I actually have a 2-page list of items that we've done that we have repaired in that odor collection system. And we've come a long ways. They have requested a air quality test that we will be performing in the next week or two also. And I'm confident that we will be very safe as our operators perform within these buildings, never mind on the outside of these buildings. We will be okay there.
When do you anticipate to have that results back of the air test?
Mo is actually scheduling that.
Okay.
I do not have the answer at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Next page of that report went on to the new items. It went back to discussing the collection system. Repeatedly, the plant has had something come through the collection system and kill the biological process. The cause has not been identified at this time. Potential causes include an oil, fuel, or chemical spill or dumping into the collection system causing low pH, a high chemical oxygen demand, or poisoning. Food, dairy, or brewery activities could also cause high BOD, biological oxygen demand, of which the plant frequently experiences a hike in the late night hours. We've been experiencing that for the 5 years that I've been working in that plant, between 11 and 1 o'clock in the morning. And we've done some research. We found that there are some facilities that are cleaning equipment on the shift from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. They're using acid washes and so forth, which would have an effect on our pH. We haven't got all of the answers, and as this goes on, we currently don't, there is no structured system in place to identify problems such as this around town. When we're sitting in a plant and we smell something come through the plant, or we see something, our oxygen drops down like there's nothing there, and our blowers are screaming, trying to put oxygen back in. We've got no way to identify the sources. I'd like to request 2 portable samplers and a flow meter to rotationally monitor our pump stations and intermittently placed at high-interest facilities. The purpose of this, we have 13 pump stations. That makes it it's sort of a shortcut to identifying sections of town where we may have problems. We have 2 samplers. We can hit 2 stations for a week, pull samples, have them tested, find out what's coming through there, because you never know when during the week it's going to come through. Maybe somebody cleans their equipment on Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. We just don't know. So we'll pull composite samples over the course of a week. After we identify which sections of town or which pump stations we're starting to see these problems, we can branch out and look at the industries or whether it be a restaurant or a household. We can start searching out further. We can pull one of these samples and samplers and start hitting individual sites. It will take time. It would be a continuous improvement project, but it's a direction that we need to move into at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Hyde. So you are requesting the 2 samplers. What's the shelf life of these items? Because it seems like this problem's been happening, as you mentioned, for 5 years now at least.
Well, in this industry, there are always variations. But yes, we've been seeing significant effects late at night for at least 5 years.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Hyde? Mr. Harden?
I just want to ask you, I know over the past several years we have come to this point where we had to replace several things at the water plant, pollution plant. What kind of condition is our water plant in? I mean, there are times where we're just buying things and agreeing to get things. What's the status? I mean, it seems like it's almost crumbling over there. And I know you're probably given supervision, taking over it in that state, but it seems like it's falling to pieces.
That's a very fair question and statement. Yes, we had a lot of items that the plant was in tough shape when I stepped in. It has come a very long ways. If you speak with any of the operators that are running it, the collection crews that are also housed there, and they watched, there was a lot of dismay and so forth. about how the plant was being run into the ground, and they didn't like seeing that, and they're very pleased with seeing that it's turned around. As I stated, we've got a couple of tanks right now, and this time when we opened them up, we didn't have debris. We didn't have 50-foot long cords of rags tied up in braking equipment. We had a 5-gallon pail worth. I put together a couple weeks ago a list of the things that we've repaired since we got there. The list is about 3 pages long, in addition to a page and a half of things that we've recently looked into in the biofilter area. Everything is in considerably better condition than it was. However, it is no longer a brand new plant as it was 10 years ago. It's now a 10-year-old plant, so repairs will continue. These samplers and the flow meter that I'm looking at aren't so much for repair as for identifying future problem sources. It's more of an expansion and a plant improvement, if you will. But the plant itself, the pump stations, if you find someone that says it isn't significantly improved, they don't know what they're talking about.
And that's not the case, but I appreciate all your hard work, and I don't know enough about the plant to criticize it, but I just know that we are always fixing something. My next thing is that you wanted these samples and this portable flow meter, and you said that this would help you get a better idea of what actually is going in, but it may not give you an idea where it's actually coming from. You said it may be coming from a brewery, you made this statement, or it may be coming from a residence. So we'll get this equipment, but how do you actually narrow it down, per se, door to door or business to business? It's only a sample. I mean, for an example, you buy this and you put it in a particular area. How does that kind of put the finger on exactly where it's coming from? Is it based on, if you have more material that is considered brewery type, is that how you narrow it down? Or if you have more gas or whatever you say, oil, would it narrow it down to a garage? So how do you how would this help us pinpoint exactly where it's coming from and come up with a solution for that? Is there some kind of chemical or something that we could buy that would off-balance this so that there is none of this happening? Or if you made a statement about this particularly happens between a certain time frame, so can we run the machines, a different form or add a different chemical to balance this out so it doesn't create a problem?
A couple of things in there. First one I want to address is a little bit off the direct question, which is, I mentioned the brewery, and I believe there's a good possibility there. I'm confident that there's something there. I'm not confident that it's the same problem that I saw back in March, because we saw oil and so forth. And one of the reasons that I want samplers is I don't want to go barking up the wrong tree of one of our best taxpayers in town. I want to look at the whole town and make sure that I've got a clear picture of what I'm going after and go in the right direction. As I said, we have 13 pump stations, 13 sanitary pump stations. Some of them feed one another, some of them do not, but they are distributed around town, different parts of the town. By pulling samples from a pump station, you start finding something in one of those pump stations, you've got an idea. From there, you know what businesses are in town, you know what industries are in town. If you're looking for a high consistency of fuel oil, you're probably not going to go looking at the restaurant. So you can narrow it down. Additionally, we have manholes all over town. How many manholes do we have, John? Thousands. where we can drop a sampler inside the manhole and just narrow it down. It's a process of elimination. It's exactly that, a process of elimination.
Any other questions for Mr. Hyde? Mr. O'Brien?
Just following up on that, so let's say we identify the source, what would our next step be?
Depending on what the source is and what the issue is, and we are doing research on this also. If it's an industry, there are parameters that we can require that they meet. We can have them put pre-treatment systems in and put limits on what they can put into our system and so forth. One of the things about the brewery, it's not a rare thing, and actually we have several breweries in town, but most of them are a little bit smaller. But I went to a conference in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on June 25th for new industrial wastewater, and the conference was on, it was at the Red Hook Brewery, and it was about exactly that. It was about pre-treatment of that type of waste, because we have got, in the last 10 years, we have 4 times as many breweries in this country as we did 2007 to 2017. And so it has become a real issue. It's something that we need to address. And there's, John just printed me or directed me to a 35-page document today on some of the state's regulations on what we can impose. So we're researching that.
And Mr. Hyde, just a quick question. So the 2 samplers you're requesting is, can you get the job done with those 2, or do you need the portable flow meter as well? Because I haven't heard you talk much about that.
The samplers, what I've done with the portable flow meter is on that particular brewery again, and I have hired, or actually I'm supposed to be speaking with the company this week. I'm putting a meter in there for 2 weeks, so I could postpone that meter a period. And the samplers would be the critical item that I need at this time.
Okay. Any other questions? Mr. Harden, yes.
Statement. I appreciate all that you do, and the fact that you were handed, this and a mess. And so you know your job better than I do, and I'm glad you do. So if you say that you need these things to, make this happen, I'm definitely on board with it. So I appreciate all of the hard work that you guys do over there.
Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'll entertain a motion to authorize the purchase of the 2 samplers, estimated at $5,000 apiece per Mr. Hyde's request. Mr. Harden made a motion. Do I have a second? By Mr. Perillo. All in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. With that, going to agenda item 5, is going to remain on the table per the town attorney's statement earlier. Thank you very much, Mr. Marino. Any new business? Okay. Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to adjourn by Mr. O'Brien and second by Mr. Harden. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.